The Gospels came into existence in stages. The stages by which the Gospels came into existence is extremely helpful in that, as literary compositions, they offer a more enriched and responsible reading. The forms in which the memories of Yeshua or Jesus were handed down are all important for an intellectual reading of the Gospels because the writers of the earliest Gospels addressed and relied on traditions that arose in their neighborhoods. For an intelligent reading of the Gospels, the social setting of tradition and the process of oral transmission are also important. The writers of the earliest Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, drew on, relied on, and addressed traditions that developed within actual living communities over a period of time. The Gospel writers did not have direct access to Yeshua or Jesus or a direct source of information that came from these traditions, so they drew upon community traditions. Let's look at the development of Christianity. From the death of Yeshua around the year 30 CE to the year 60 CE, it is possible to get a rough grasp of the Christian movement's first rapid expansion across the Mediterranean world, from Jerusalem to Rome, during the first 30 years of its existence. We can do this by looking at the Acts of Apostles, written around the year 85 CE. The Acts of Apostles is clearly selective with clear biases in its written account. It is very concerned with showing the harmonious relationship among its early Christian leaders, emphasizing unity rather than discord, and the continuity of the Hebrew story. Paul also emphasizes continuity between Judaism and Christianity, the new form of Judaism. But when we check the Acts of Apostles with other historians and the letters of Paul, which are written between the year 40 and 64 of the Common Era, the book of Acts turns out to be rather reliable. If we take the book of Acts and Paul together, we see the picture of a movement that expanded with speed, without strong external or internal controls, and which had to accomplish major transitions from the beginning because of instability due to persecution. We see a geographical shift from Palestine to the diaspora. We see a cultural shift from a land dominated by symbols of Torah to Greco-Roman symbols. We see a demographic shift from being exclusively a Hebrew/Jewish movement to being largely a Gentile movement. We see a linguistic shift from Aramaic to Greek and a sociological shift from rural to urban. It is within the context of such social activities or shifts within communities that the memory of Yeshua or Jesus was handed down through oral tradition and writing of letters. The Gospels were not composed by eyewitnesses immediately after the death of Yeshua or Jesus. Before the appearance of the Gospels as literary compositions, the memory of Yeshua was transmitted in both oral and written fragments, and it was not done immediately after his death. The Gospels, then, are crystallizations of shared traditions. They are a complex development of traditions within the life of churches across a time span from the death of Yeshua in 30 CE and the year 70 CE. The writing of the first gospel dates some 40 years later. When Paul used the word evangelion or good news, it had nothing to do with a written story about Jesus or Yeshua or what he said or did. The good news originally referred to an oral proclamation of what God had done through the death and resurrection of Yeshua or Jesus. This helps to account for the fact that Paul's letters, for example, demonstrate forms of Greek speech. They are meant to be proclaimed, to be read out loud, It is an oral experience communicated through written form. Oral activity and scribal activity were closely intertwined and mixed together within Judaism and the Greco-Roman culture. For example, letters for the most part were dictated, and when they were delivered, they were read out loud to others. The gospel is a complex development of traditions within the life of churches, from the period of the death of Yeshua between 30 CE and 70 CE. The first gospel was dated some 40 years later. We are going to look at this period of some 40 years of oral tradition and activity of the memory of Yeshua.